9:54, Elizabeth Geoghegan, Fixed Income Portfolio Manager en Mediolanum International Funds Limited. Good day, Elizabeth Geoghegan.
Good morning. How are you? Good morning.
Bonds have been under pressure all year, but have been a particular focus in recent weeks. Why is this?
Yeah, it's mainly due to the UK, really. If you roll back in the last week or two, you had the announcement of the UK mini budget, which had the largest tax cuts since the 1970s. And what's more, these were largely on an unfunded basis. So, you had a fall in sterling, and the unfunded aspect of the budget meant that UK yields rose significantly. A great example would be the 30-year gilt, which normally is the most sanguine part of the curve, but it moved, you were looking at 100 bip moves within a day. And these kind of moves prompted the BOE to step in and announce that they would purchase bonds right at the exact time that they should be announcing or starting their QT, or quantitative tightening process. Now, thankfully, the UK government have rolled back on some of these announcements, but unfortunately, a lot of the damage still remains, particularly when you look at, front-end rates across the UK, US and Europe, which are still pricing for higher terminal rates than before the UK budget.
Terminal rate has been repricing higher throughout the year for most central banks. Why did the repricing of the Bank of England terminal rate have such an impact?
I think it's really the magnitude of the move. Before the UK budget, you had terminal rate pricing for the UK at around 4 or 4.3%. But then after the budget, this spiked to as high as over 6%. So when you have moves of both this magnitude and to this level, it really starts to stress the UK consumer who, especially when you look at the UK economy, the UK consumer or homeowner will refinance every 2 to 4 years. So the prospect of higher rates really quickly translates to higher mortgage rates. And when you consider that the consumer and housing play such a huge part of the economy, both in the UK and globally, it's no wonder that markets started to price in a deeper downturn or indeed a recession for markets into the future.
Is there a recession coming?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's been a point of debate for markets for the entire year. When you look at leading economic indicators, they have definitely been pointing to a deterioration in conditions. However, when you look at the hard data, such as GDP or labour, the economy continued to remain quite resilient. So this has been quite a tug of war for markets for the last year. And then, on top of that, central banks have had their own tug of war in that the inflation that they're tackling is quite unique to the inflation that they have previously tackled. It's more driven by supply side constraints than the historical demand-driven inflation, which means that a lot of its monetary policy tools or transition mechanisms are a lot slower to have an impact in the economy, which makes market participants think that central banks will have to continue to hike and indeed over tighten, leading to what's called a hard landing or indeed a recession. You also look across the waters to China, which is experiencing quite a significant slowdown after their zero COVID policy. And when you bring this into the context of the wider global economy, it's very rare for a global economy to grow in a positive momentum without the help of Chinese growth. So there are a lot of headwinds for the global economy coming forward. That being said, there still are the positives of, strong economic resilience, a tight labour market, healthy balance sheets, both on a household and corporate level, and indeed excess savings. So the magnitude of this downturn is still up for debate.
Aside from bond markets, another area of focus seems to be the dollar. What is behind the significant strengthening seen all year?
Yeah, so the dollar has really extended past, previous records. When you look at the dollar on, any kind of fundamental charting, purchasing power parity basis, it really looks overvalued, overbought, and indeed, very rich. However, when you put it in the context of, the other G10 currencies, for example, the euro or even the UK, it's very obvious that what's helping the dollar continue in its strength trajectory is the fact that it has very limited idiosyncratic risks. When you look to Europe, the euro is under a lot of pressure because of all of the uncertainty associated with the terrible conflicts between Ukraine and Russia. Equally in the UK, you have so much political and economic turmoil that the sterling has been under pressure also. As well, then, when you look at any other safe haven type currencies that usually do well in times of uncertainty, you have the yen. But unfortunately, the Central Bank of Japan, or the BOJ, has been pursuing a policy of accommodation, or a dovish monetary policy, which is at total odds with the rest of the world. So these low rates have been a huge pushing factor for the weakness of the yen. So when you couple the fact that you have so many kind of unique idiosyncratic risks and aspects that are playing into the weakness of the euro, the sterling, and Japan, it's very hard to see the significant strength in the dollar reversing in a significant manner anytime soon.
You mentioned Ukraine. What are markets thinking about gas and energy prices?
Yeah, Ukraine has obviously been a huge focus for markets for the entire year, and the knock-on impact that it has on gas prices, especially in Europe. Thankfully, prices have been in a downward trajectory since their peak in August. They're now at the kind of same levels that we had in November of last year. So we've taken out the highs of this year. However, that being said, we did have some spikes at the end of last month with the news around the Baltic headlines. However, the trajectory does remain in a downward trend, and this is for a few reasons. Firstly, Europe have been able to secure a lot of gas supply for this winter. I think they're at about 90% of their storage capacity at present. Equally as well, the weather seems to be a lot milder than anticipated, and this helped to alleviate concerns about, very drastic winter conditions and increased need for heating gas. And then finally, the advancement of Ukraine within the Ukraine-Russian conflict has helped to add to some positive headlines. Of course, challenges will remain as we move through this year and start to focus on next year. The supply issues that we face this year will still remain for winter of next year. So until the uncertainty around supply and indeed the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, as long as that stays, the prices, even if they trend lower, will still remain very vulnerable to huge spikes higher, as we saw even at the end of last month.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth Geoghegan, Fixed Income Portfolio Manager in Mediolanum International Funds Limited. Good day, good business.